Sometimes a single moment changes everything. One man, one choice, and a life saved. But what happens when the hero refuses every reward and walks away with nothing, except his own truth? If you want to know how this story unfolds, stay with us. And don't forget hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next powerful story. The sound of twisting metal ripped through the air as a beam buckled and crashed down onto the hood of a black sedan, glass atomizing into glitter that stung the skin. Smoke and the sharp bite of coolant flooded the cabin. The driver, Clara Weber, couldn't get her legs free. The frame had pinched just enough to make movement feel like wrenching bone. She coughed, blinking through spiderweb cracks, and then rough, steady hands pushed through the shattered window. No shouting, no panic, just a low, calm "I've got you." The stranger levered the door with a crowbar, tore his forearms bloody against jagged edges, and dragged her clear across the grit. Sirens wailed in the distance. He shrugged off his worn jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then faded into the milling crowd before she could even focus on his face. By the time paramedics crouched beside her, all that remained was the jacket's weight and the echo of that quiet voice. Clara pressed the heel of her hand to the tender bruise beneath her collarbone and stared at the jacket later, in an office that smelled faintly of printer toner and cold coffee. She was good at answers, the kind you could put in spreadsheets or carve into milestone charts, but this was not that kind of problem. Why save a life and vanish? Why refuse the currency everyone else seemed to understand? Security footage offered angles of helmets and dust. HR offered spreadsheets of names that meant nothing without the steadiness she remembered in his hands. When she closed her eyes, she could still feel the scrape of his jacket's lining against her neck, a little rip at the seam where someone had mended it with mismatched thread. It was a detail too human to forget. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself it was about fairness. But under both lived a simpler truth. Somewhere a man had acted without calculation, and she needed to know who he was. At 5:30 the next morning, a different world stirred. Eric Bauer silenced his alarm with a quick thumb and lay still for a heartbeat, listening for his son's breathing through the thin wall. Lucas slept like a cat in a patch of sun-curled, content, one hand open over his cheek. Eric moved by ritual. Kettle on, lunch packed, homework folder checked, a note tucked inside with a silly doodle, because second-grade days felt shorter when there was a secret waiting at noon. He shook a few oats into a bowl Lucas liked because the rim was chipped like a shark's tooth. Mrs. Klein downstairs would watch him after school for a few hours. She'd refuse extra cash and accept a fixed shelf instead. Eric's hands were built for fixing things: hinges, leaky valves, days that threatened to come apart at the seam. Once, those hands had drawn clean lines across vellum, shaping future skylines. When responsibility arrived early and heavy, he folded the dream and put it where dreams go when they have to wait. He didn't regret choosing Lucas. He only wondered sometimes whether the choosing had to erase the rest of him. The sight woke mean, cables humming in the morning air, each floor a different kind of noise. Eric clipped in, checked a harness that someone else might have trusted, and he never did, and walked the skeleton of the tower with the caution of a man who understood how fast gravity made decisions. "Bauer," Martin called over a generator's growl. "Rig 2 is half an hour behind. We need those supports set before lunch." Eric raised a hand in acknowledgement and then stopped because a frayed tag on a slung bundle of rebar fluttered where it shouldn't. Wind tugged. A hook drifted. The cable drew a lazy arc that could become a scythe with one gust. He lunged, slammed the emergency stop, and caught a younger worker by the vest just as the bundle swung and kissed the railing hard enough to ring. The kid swore, pale. "You saved my dash." "Gloves?" Eric said, voice even. Eyes up. Word of yesterday's accident had already leaked between thermoses and sandwich wrappers. Someone said the woman in the car was important. Someone else said there'd be a reward. Eric kept his head down. He didn't speak when the guys near the hoist laughed about heroes. He measured, cut, set, and let the day take his attention like always. The search, however, refused to stay in its lane. Clara tried the official routes and found them too slow, too polite. She reframed interviews as safety reviews, stood at the back of briefings, watched for a posture she remembered: weight in the heels, shoulders squared, a sort of quiet that wasn't passivity but focus. She authorized a site-wide safety bonus and meant it. She expanded training hours and meant that, too. And still, the absence held. By late afternoon, she did what she had promised herself she wouldn't. She put on a hard hat, signed the registry with a clipped signature, and took the service elevator up to the temporary deck to see for herself how the building that almost killed her was going to stand. The air was sharper that high up, laced with cutting oil and the metallic taste of rain that hadn't yet fallen. A foreman began to tell her she couldn't be here without a guide. She nodded, not hearing him, because the deck opened like a stage and the choreography of work absorbed her completely, men and women moving in sync with the machinery, a precarious dance where missteps were costly. A warning shout split the hum short, sharp followed by the snarl of a brake that didn't catch the first time. A sling line twanged, and a suspended pallet yawed toward the edge where she stood, slow and unstoppable, heavy enough to turn bone into rumor. Clara didn't freeze. She stepped back exactly one pace, exactly enough to still be in the arc. A hand caught the back of her vest and yanked her hard into safety, the pallet hissing past close enough to lift her hair. She stumbled, grabbed steel, turned breathless, furious, grateful, and found herself looking up into a face she didn't know and yet had been seeing for days in the negative space of memory. Calm eyes, dust-darkened lashes, a mouth set in a line that read like a habit of holding. He let go as if contact burned. "You shouldn't be up here," he said, voice quiet as before. She swallowed, jacketless, heartbeat stomping in her throat, and realized she finally had the answer she'd been chasing. "I've been looking for you," she said just as the deck radio crackled with her name and every head within earshot turned. Clara had spent her career mastering boardrooms where hesitation meant weakness, yet here she was, unsteady, staring at a man who seemed determined to vanish into the background. The foreman barked for everyone to get back to work, and in the confusion Eric slipped away, blending into the rhythm of the crew as if he had never been there. Clara's pulse was still racing. Her palm stung where she had braced against the steel. She had finally seen his face, heard his voice, yet he had looked at her with the cool detachment of someone refusing to acknowledge what had passed between them. For a woman who built her empire on control, the lack of it unsettled her more than the near miss had. Eric returned to the scaffolds, his heart pounding harder than the machine's. He had never wanted attention, never sought recognition. What mattered was Lucas, the boy who would be waiting at home with endless questions about homework and dinosaurs. Attention meant vulnerability, and vulnerability threatened the stability Eric had fought to protect since the day his wife walked out. He didn't dislike Clara. He simply didn't want her world colliding with his. But fate seemed amused by his caution, because no matter how carefully he tried to fade back into routine, she kept appearing, her car idling near the site at lunch, her figure glimpsed on the street as he clocked out, the weight of her gaze when she thought he wasn't looking. Clara's determination grew sharper with every failed attempt to thank him. She told herself it was gratitude, but she knew it was more. There had been something in the way he moved. No hesitation, no calculation, just action. In her world, everyone measured value in contracts and margins. He had measured it in humanity. She asked HR to pull records, ordered interviews disguised as safety checks, even attended a crew appreciation event where she scanned every face. Nothing gave her certainty until the close call on the deck when he saved her for the second time. That had stripped away all doubt. She finally had a name, Eric Bauer. A single father, 6 years on the job, spotless record. The file told her the facts, but it was the silence in his eyes that told her who he really was. That evening, Eric sat at the worn kitchen table while Lucas colored spaceships on a scrap paper. The boy chattered about rockets and how one day they'd fly together past the clouds. Eric nodded, smiling faintly, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Clara Weber, the most powerful woman he had ever seen up close, had looked at him today like she needed something he didn't understand. He wasn't sure which unsettled him more, the idea that she might try to fold him into her polished world, or the thought that a part of him wanted to know what she saw when she looked at him. Lucas broke his spiral of thoughts with a proud grin. "Daddy, when I build my rocket, you'll be the captain." Eric ruffled his hair. "I'll hold you to that, buddy." And silently, he promised himself he wouldn't let anything jeopardize their little universe. But Clara wasn't done. She had spent years building walls, and for the first time, someone had broken through without even trying. Gratitude could have ended with a check, a promotion, or a neat press release. Instead, She found herself rehearsing words in the back of her mind, wondering what it would take to make him accept even the smallest gesture. When she finally summoned him to her office under the guise of a special assignment, she watched him step through the door, dust on his boots, gloves in his hands, and realized her carefully scripted lines meant nothing. He didn't look impressed by the skyline view behind her or the designer furniture surrounding them. He simply looked cautious, like a man already deciding which way the nearest exit was. Clara folded her hands to keep them from trembling. This time, she thought, he wouldn't be able to walk away so easily. Clara gestured toward the chair across from her desk, but Eric stayed standing for a moment, wary, his work gloves still in his hand. Finally, he sat, shoulders stiff, eyes scanning the room like it was a construction site where every detail mattered. She studied him openly, now dark hair in need of a cut, calloused hands, lines etched into his face from years of labor and worry. He was nothing like the men who usually filled this office, and that difference was exactly what pulled her attention. "You saved my life," she began, her tone softer than she expected. Eric shook his head once. "You needed help. I was there." Clara leaned forward. "That's not the whole of it. Most people freeze. You didn't. Mitchell Enterprises rewards people who act with courage. I have an offer for you." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were papers detailing a management position, better pay, safer hours, full benefits. She expected relief, gratitude, maybe even awe. Instead, he glanced at the folder only long enough to push it back toward her. "I appreciate it," he said evenly, "but I'm not interested." The refusal hit harder than she wanted to admit. "Perhaps I wasn't clear," she said, the edge returning to her voice. "This position would more than double your salary. Your son Lucas, isn't it, would have opportunities you can't give him right now." Eric's jaw tightened. "I didn't help you to get something back. That's not how I live." For a moment, silence filled the office. Clara, who had stared down investors, competitors, and ruthless board members, found herself at a loss for words. She tried again, softer this time. "Then why did you do it?" He hesitated, his eyes steady. "Because my son watches everything I do. He needs to see what kind of man I am." The words cracked something in her, something she thought she had buried under years of steel and glass. Clara had built her empire by believing everything had a price, that every exchange could be balanced with numbers. But here sat a man who measured his choices not by profit, but by the example he left for a child. For a brief moment, she envied him. She tried a different approach, offering a college fund, better housing, something tangible for Lucas. But Eric stood, disappointment flickering across his features. "Turning this into a transaction cheapens it," he said quietly. "And I won't let that touch my son." As he reached the door, Clara called after him. "Wait." She opened a cabinet and retrieved his old jacket, the one left draped around her after the crash. When she handed it over, their fingers brushed. The contact was brief but charged, leaving Clara unsettled in a way she hadn't expected. Eric murmured, almost to himself, "I wondered where that went," and then slipped out of the office without another word. Clara sat back down slowly, staring at the empty doorway. She had built towers that scraped the sky, but she couldn't build a way to keep him in the room. And yet, for the first time in years, she found herself determined not to let go. Saturday morning sunlight filtered through the park's trees as Eric sat on a weathered bench, watching Lucas conquer the jungle gym with fearless energy. Weekends were sacred, no foreman, no deadlines, just the sound of his son's laughter carrying through the air. "Daddy, watch this," Lucas shouted, dangling upside down from the bars. "I see you, champ," Eric called back, smiling despite himself. He was so focused on Lucas that he didn't notice the woman approaching until she spoke. "He's fearless." Eric turned sharply, and there she was, Clara Weber, dressed not in power suits but in jeans and a simple blouse, so out of place in his world that for a moment he thought he was imagining her. "What are you doing here?" he asked cautiously. Clara gestured toward the path. "I live nearby. Sometimes I walk through." Eric nodded but turned his attention back to Lucas, who was now attempting the monkey bars. Clara hesitated, then sat at the far end of the bench. "I've been thinking about what you said in my office, about turning things into transactions." He didn't respond, and she pressed on. "In my world, everything has a cost-benefit analysis. But you made me realize that not everything should." Eric finally glanced at her. "Sounds exhausting," he said quietly. Before she could answer, Lucas ran over, cheeks flushed. "Daddy, there's an ice cream truck. Can I please get one?" Eric chuckled, reaching for his wallet. "All right, but just a small one." Lucas spotted Clara then and, without hesitation, asked, "Are you Daddy's friend?" Clara bent down slightly. "I'm Clara, and yes, I work with your father." Lucas's eyes widened. "Do you build tall buildings too?" "My dad's the best builder ever." Eric flushed, but Clara smiled. "Something like that." Lucas skipped off with money in hand, leaving an awkward silence between the two adults. Eric finally spoke. "I should apologize for walking out of your office the way I did." Clara shook her head. "No, I should apologize. I approached you like I approach everything else, like a deal to close. That wasn't fair." Lucas returned, balancing 3 frozen treats. "Daddy, I got you a strawberry one, and I got vanilla for your friend because everyone likes vanilla." He thrust the cone toward Clara, his grin infectious. Clara accepted it carefully. "Thank you, Lucas." They sat eating, listening as the boy launched into stories about school and rockets. Clara found herself laughing at his dramatic hand gestures, the way he smeared ice cream across his cheek without noticing. For 2 hours, she wasn't a CEO calculating margins. She was just a woman sitting in the sun, sharing ice cream with a child who saw the world as endlessly good. As they left the park, Lucas tugged at Clara's hand. "Will you come next Saturday? Daddy promised we'd fly a kite if it's windy." Clara hesitated, looking at Eric. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "I'd like that," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Lucas beamed, satisfied with the promise. Clara walked back toward her apartment later, and for the first time in years, she realized the tight knot of tension in her chest had loosened just a little. But with that came another feeling she hadn't allowed herself in a long time: the dangerous, uncertain pull of wanting more. The following Saturday came with a steady breeze, perfect for Lucas's kite. Eric carried the spool while Lucas ran ahead, the bright fabric snapping to life against the pale sky. Clara arrived a few minutes later, dressed simply again, her hair loose, her eyes brighter than Eric remembered. Lucas spotted her instantly. "You came," he shouted, nearly tripping over his own feet in excitement. Clara laughed, steadying him. "I wouldn't miss it." Eric gave a small nod, but his gaze lingered longer than he intended. He had told himself all week that this was dangerous, that mixing worlds could only end badly. Yet seeing Lucas's joy at her presence disarmed his resolve. They spent the afternoon together, Lucas darting between them as the kite soared and dipped. Clara found herself laughing at his every triumph, and Eric noticed how naturally she bent down to tie his shoe, or listened intently to his endless chatter about rockets. It unsettled him. Clara belonged to boardrooms, not playgrounds, and yet she seemed at ease here, almost lighter. As Lucas chased the kite's shadow, Clara turned to Eric. "He's happy. You've done that for him." Eric shook his head. "He makes himself happy. Kids are tougher than we think." Clara hesitated, then asked softly, "And you? Are you happy, Eric?" He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on Lucas. Later, as they sat on the park bench again, Lucas feeding ducks with the last of the bread, Clara spoke carefully. "When I read about you in your file, it said you once studied architecture. You were on track for something bigger." Eric stiffened. "Files don't tell the whole story. I gave it up when Lucas came along. That was the right choice." Clara tilted her head. "Still, you built dreams before you built beams." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. She saw the flicker in his eyes, a quiet, achy thought he had hidden. Clara realized then that Eric wasn't simply surviving. He was carrying the weight of a life he'd almost lived. The weeks blurred into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Saturday meetings became normal, feeding ducks, flying kites, listening to Lucas chatter about space or superheroes. Clara found herself rescheduling board lunches and shortening late-night calls just to make sure she never missed those afternoons. Eric noticed, though he never mentioned it. What unsettled him wasn't her presence, but how much he had come to expect it. One evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Eric stood by the window of his apartment and admitted the truth to himself. He was afraid. Afraid that Clara was a storm that would pull him in, and when it passed, Lucas would be left with the wreckage. Clara felt her own shift. Over dinner with her oldest friend Caroline, she was asked bluntly, "What exactly is happening with you and that construction worker?" Clara tried to dismiss it, but the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. "He's different," she said finally. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Different is one thing, but do you see a future there? Or is he just a reminder of what you think you're missing? The words stung, because they forced Clara to confront a question she had been avoiding. What was she really looking for in Eric and Lucas? Was it gratitude, friendship, or something far more dangerous? Clara's car idled outside the old apartment building for several minutes before she finally forced herself to step out. She had never knocked on a stranger's door without a plan, but tonight she had no script, no carefully crafted strategy. When Eric opened the door, surprise flickered across his face. "Clara." She swallowed, suddenly aware of her tailored suit, her polished heels against his scuffed floor. "May I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small but tidy, the walls lined with Lucas's colorful drawings and makeshift furniture that Eric had clearly built by hand. It wasn't luxury, but it radiated something her penthouse never had: warmth. They sat at the table, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. Finally, Clara spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about cheapening things when everything becomes a transaction. You were right. I've spent my life buying solutions, managing problems like they're contracts. But with you." She trailed off, frustrated at her own lack of words. Eric folded his arms. "Clara, if this is another offer, I can't take it. Lucas and I, we don't need saving." She leaned forward, eyes steady. "I know. This isn't an offer. It's me saying I don't want to be your CEO or your benefactor. I just want to be part of your life. Yours and Lucas is on equal ground. No strings." Eric studied her, suspicion and something softer warring in his expression. "Why?" he asked finally. Clara took a slow breath. "Because when I'm with you both, I remember who I was before skyscrapers and boardrooms. I measure a day by Lucas's laughter instead of profit margins. And because..." She hesitated, her voice dropping. "Because I think I could love you both, if you'd let me." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Eric turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Clara, you don't know me. My life is small, messy. You'd regret trading your world for this one." She shook her head. "Maybe I don't need a different world. Maybe I just need a real one." The weeks that followed tested them both. Clara stepped back at work, delegating more, forcing herself to leave the office before sunset. Eric, with her encouragement but not her intervention, applied for a project coordinator role finally, using the knowledge he'd once abandoned. Lucas adapted faster than either of them, tugging Clara into routines as if she'd always been there. Bedtime stories, Saturday kites, group hugs before school. Clara found herself carrying crayons in her briefcase, scheduling board meetings around soccer practice, and laughing at small things she hadn't noticed in years. Eric, still cautious, began to realize that she wasn't trying to fix him only to stand beside him. One crisp autumn morning, the three of them sat around the breakfast table, Lucas carefully cutting toast into heart shapes while Eric flipped pancakes. Clara poured coffee into mismatched mugs, smiling at how natural it felt. Lucas chattered about rockets and playgrounds. Eric teased him gently, and Clara found herself thinking that no boardroom, no tower scraping the clouds, had ever given her this feeling of belonging. As they bundled up to leave, Lucas insisted on a group hug, his small arms binding them together. Eric's hand brushed Clara's as they pulled apart, and for once, he didn't let go quickly. He met her eyes, the guarded look finally easing. "Thank you," he said quietly. Clara tilted her head. "For what?" His answer was simple. "For seeing me. Not what I can give, not what I can do. Just me." Clara smiled, her chest tightening with something deeper than victory. "Then thank you for the same," she whispered.